Chapter 13, Meeting the Witch. Dogan Rhonda. This time would be different. I would eavesdrop on the conversation that the Emperor and Lamare would be having. I wouldn't let my face give me away this time. I pulled at the corners of my mouth to make myself frown the way I practiced in front of a mirror before leaving the house. I bribed a young girl with a bunch of flowers to keep watch over the orphaned boy. The young girl bragged that she was good with children, and I could only hope she had not been lying when she said that. Today would mark the start of my revenge. My God, what was I thinking? Lamare was, the only love of my life. But if she was such a devious person for using her power to make people suffer, was there any salvation left for her? No justification would hold everything she had written in the scroll as anything but heartless. Why did she drown all those Durellans? And how could the Emperor be a part of it? After engaging in an argument with myself for hours, I decided not to wait by the gates. It would be a long walk beside Lamare, and with my faint heart, I feared that if she looked at me and said my name, my resolve would crumble into shards, each one pinning my heart until it ached so much I couldn't bear it. And there would be no more pain left inside of me to haunt me of the deaths of those whom I loved, those who died under the hands of this crafty scribe. But, Lamare could be a seer too. If she were, she could unquestionably see what would happen in the future and write about them in the scrolls. That would excuse her from all the vile crimes I think she did. But something just didn't add up. If she were a seer, why would she be so afraid that I read her scroll and that I might tell someone about it? Isn't that the whole point of being a seer, to see the future and warn people about what they see? But instead, Lamare doesn't even want the contents of her scroll to be read and be known. So that leaves me with only one answer: she must be a crafty, devious witch. What was Lamare's power anyway? I never really thought about it because I had always assumed it had something to do with how she looked. She's so beautiful that even if I was mad at her, my chest still drummed like crazy when I saw her. The Emperor was looking at me now. I kept to my frown, and he looked away in disgust. What could he be thinking? Well, I don't need to know now. His thoughts would only matter when Lamare gets here. From inside the chambers, I heard the clacking of boots against the palace floors. They had to be Lamare's and the escorts. I opened the door and counted 3 soldiers escorting her. I fought the urge to look at her face. Gods, this was difficult. But I had to concentrate. I didn't want to see her. Not even one glimpse. When she passed by me, her usual hint of lavender hit my nose, and it was my salvation. It was the scent I associated with her and the only fragrance I longed for when I was on the battlefields. And the scent of tobacco, too, of course. Lamare is here, Your Grace, I said. When the Emperor acknowledged and took the scrolls from her, I immediately ushered the escorts out. Then I closed and barred the wide doors. Don't look at her, you idiot. I kept telling myself. Bow your crazy head and look at your toes. Oh, this was difficult. Even tougher than taming a dragon. The Emperor sat back on his throne. He must have had some training on speed reading because he unrolled the scroll, skimmed through it, and asked, 11 days? There was ice in his voice. I couldn't see Lamare, but when she spoke, I knew she must have been afraid. I recognized the soft shaking in her voice. Your Grace, I wasn't able to finish everything. I beg your forgiveness, but if you would think it over, it could also be good. You would see how nature tolls on its own without any help from anyone or anywhere, she said. See how nature tolls on its own, is that the first clue? Does it mean that what's written are events bound to happen? I don't want nature to take its course. Humans are unpredictable. They can't have a choice. This is my rule we're talking about, and you keep forgetting your place in it. Your Grace, 3 days is very short. Nothing could happen in that time that may cause you to lose your empire. It isn't short. I'll tell you what's short, your life if you don't do as I tell you. This is unacceptable, Lamare. The Emperor retorted. I looked at them, unable to hide my confusion. The Emperor's words sounded like a threat to Lamare, and well, she was special to me not so long ago, so I too was troubled. Lamare's shoulders stiffened. I'll write the other days in, Your Grace. I'll be back in a fortnight and bring you a scroll with 3 extra days to catch up on those that I've missed. The Emperor raised his arm, and I almost knew what he was about to do, but I was still too slow. He summoned air and pushed the chair that Lamare was sitting on, sending it tumbling back. I was torn between running to Lamare or holding my post by the door. I watched as she shakily stood up and bowed to the Emperor. Your Grace, I take it you're giving me leave, she said. She stood there for a few more seconds, seeming uncertain about what to do next. She looked fragile, and I found it hard to believe that she could be devious. When there was no response to Lamare's words, she headed straight towards the door. The Emperor kept reading the script as though the words absorbed him. The door opened behind me, and when I glanced at it, I was only able to see the train of Lamare's skirt. I thought it best to escort her away. Along the hallway, I found her walking as fast as she could, and I had to sprint a few yards before I came to her heels. The woman could walk very fast. When she reached the Canellan Palace yards, a carriage was already waiting for her. I didn't get a chance to talk to her. Oh, this is bad. I needed to talk to her, to confront her, for all the vile things she had written. Why did she do it? There must be something that drove her to commit a heinous crime because I believed her to be a righteous woman. I couldn't surmise how she could have gotten herself into this mess. Before I knew what I was doing, I had run towards the stables and saddled my horse. I rode and galloped away, running after Lamare's carriage, hoping to find some answers. The way to Lamare's hometown was arduous, and when I saw her get off from the wagon and enter her cottage, my heart broke a little. True, my accusations were as good as confirmed, and yet, there was something about her that held me back, urging me to investigate further before I made any judgments. But then I would remember Mathis, the lady whose foot was trapped in the floodwaters, the other lives lost in the flood, and suddenly the emotions inside my heart would reverse. My puny head kept blaming all of these on Lamare and the Emperor, who had conspired to hurt my people. Could I ever attack the Emperor when my honor meant seeing him safe? I didn't think I could. That's why I had to start with Lamare. She had no hold on me. Or at least there was nothing that bonded us. It was a one-way relationship, fool. I kept reminding myself. One that would never be consummated, so why did I hold back in forming a judgment about her? I dismounted the horse and reined her in. Before leaving my bay, I patted her on the neck. I'm a big man, and I'm not accustomed to hiding. But when needed, I could make myself difficult to spot. I moved around the cottage, peeping inside at the openings, wondering what I would find inside. I saw Lamare in the kitchen, browsing through the cupboard that didn't seem to hold any good stock. She closed it and looked under the sink for something. I stepped sideways to avoid being seen, just in case she glanced back. The room adjacent to where I was peering from seemed to belong to her child. Through the window, I could make out the unkempt bed. The wall covered with stick drawings only made my hunches stronger that this could be her son's room. Some books were opened on top of a desk as though the boy had been studying for something. I crouched and crept slowly towards another window, trying not to step on the dry grass that littered the yard. I straightened up and was shocked to find myself staring into Lamare's eyes. Instead of running away from me, she moved forward and slid open the window wider. I painted my face with the hostility that she deserved. I narrowed my eyes and let the corners of my mouth sag downwards. If this doesn't scare her, I don't know what will. Dogan, what are you doing here? And she had to utter my name again. This is going to be tough. What? I stammered, feeling self-conscious all of a sudden. What are you doing here? Out of all the questions in the world, sometimes the simplest ones are the most difficult to answer. I needed to talk to you, I said, although in my head, what I really wanted to say was, I want to attack you and make you scream agonizingly as I slit your throat, which... Lamare smiled. Oh, dear gods. Don't make it harder for me, please. Don't stand by the window. It's pretty cramped here, but I'm sure I can find a comfortable place for you to sit on, she said. Then she vanished from the window. I crouched down again, suddenly undecided about how I would phrase my questions to her, when suddenly a hand gently tapped my shoulder. I stood up straight from where I was and bumped my head on the roof scutter. Really? Did coming after Lamare have to be written like the gods were playing a joke on me? Come on, follow me, was all she had to say to make me trail after her and forget all about why I set foot in Wawang in the first place. Entering the cottage was even worse for me as the gentle scent of lavender filled my nostrils. I exhaled heavily, breathing out sharply only to find myself reveling in inhaling her scent again. Ugh! Enough of this weakness. I scowled at myself for being a slave to my feelings. Here, make yourself comfortable, Lamare said as she pushed a stool towards me. Make myself comfortable on a stool? There was nothing here that would fit me. Nonetheless, I took the stool. Does the Emperor want me back? He didn't exactly give me permission to leave, but when he shoved me with air, I had assumed. No. It's not that. Lamare pulled a stool and sat down in front of me. She looked into my eyes. Oh, those eyes that could make men crazy. I gulped to control my emotions. What is it then? She asked. What was it? What was it? Oh, my gods. I sat in front of her and gazed into her eyes, and instantly, I couldn't remember what in the world I was here for. I pictured Mathis, and some of the pain found its way into my heart. I stared into Lamare's eyes. I know you for what you are, my lady, I said, watching her face for any reaction. Lamare blinked. Then her eyes darted to the right and then quickly to the left as though sensing some inexplicable trouble ahead. You're a witch, I said. A what? How could you say that? She said in a whisper. The flood. Dirella. 4 days, I said, trying to read her expression. She shook her head. You must have mistaken me for someone else. I was there in Dirella, pulling corpses from inside the houses. Corpses of those who had drowned. All I could think of was how cruel the gods were to bring such tragedy forth to the land. Lamare stood up and backed away from me. It's not true. Your accusations are unfounded. They are true. I shouted. Everything came back to me in a flash. I remembered how I felt when I was still back in Dirella, trying desperately to save lives. When I was punching Rod as he kicked a man off a roof and into the flood to die. When I had to slit the throat of a woman who was so kind to smile so prettily at me. When I learned that my family was gone forever. My family. My very own flesh and blood suffered from the words of this crafty and devious scribe in front of me. You are a witch. I pointed a finger at her to drive home the accusation. It worked. She trembled and sagged back down on the stool. Her head was in her hands. It's not true. Don't you dare point a finger at me. I did what I had to do. She was guilty. She confessed. I didn't know which broke my heart more, hearing her say that she did it or having watched the line of dead bodies littering Dirella before I left. You can't judge me, she cried. I didn't know what to say. I expected it would be more difficult. But the real challenge was where to bring her. The Emperor thought she was important. He would never take her in or throw her into the Canellan dungeons. Now, what do I do? Where should I take her? Take me. Chain my hands and do justice the way you think you should, she said, sniffling, wiping away her tears. I was taken aback. Bind her wrists in chains? Never. But it seemed the right thing to do. There was no other way. I was unprepared for this meeting. I thought that I was, but here I am, finding pleasure by looking at her and nothing more. I moved forward to take her hands that were thrust out in the air waiting for me to take them. I took her hands, still confused. I caught her. She confessed. But what would I do with her if the Emperor was on her side? If I turned her in, it was as good as cursing my neck and handing myself to the Emperor for the gallows. I gripped her wrists before I realized it was a trick. As soon as I was holding Lamare's wrists, she kicked me in the groin, really hard. Then her hands flew and left me numb in all places above my waist. I never saw that coming, especially from someone so small. She pushed towards the door, leaving me stunned. After a moment of recollection, however, I ran after her, and before she could come out the door, I leapt, hoping to catch her body. What I failed to consider was how low the ceiling of her cottage was. I bumped my head against it, sending a lamp crashing down the floor with me. I looked at the open door in amusement. How badly I had planned this out. My groin throbbed, and this would give me a hard time sitting on the saddle. But that was the only way to chase after her. I stood up and ran forward, clutching at my crotch, and grimaced in pain as I sat on the saddle. When stupidity happens, it usually happens in threes. I kicked at my horse, but she wouldn't budge. The rope was still holding the horse. I climbed down, untied her, and counted the minutes lost as I strode forward, galloping after Lamare's trail.